When we look at immigration in culture and later assimilation, few groups are more interesting than the Japanese Americans. The Meiji Restoration in Japan, which took place from 1866 to 69, was a political and social revolution following the ending of the isolationist policies which had been in place for over 200 years through the power of the Tokugawa shogunate. This revolution resulted in the doors to a previously isolated Japan being swung wide open, allowing Japanese citizens who previously had been stranded in Japan under the threat of execution if they left, the freedom to travel wherever they pleased. America had been on the forefront in pushing open Japan's harbors in order to carry out trade and spread American ideals and Christianity, and a large amount of Japanese citizens apparently liked what they saw and decided to seek a better life in America, in Alaska and Hawaii to be exact. The first Japanese migrants primarily worked in the Hawaiian sugarcane plantations. Due to their industrious nature and strong work ethics, the Japanese immigrants did very well for themselves despite being segregated from the general population. Multiculturalism among the plantation workforce was intentionally enforced in order to prevent the workers from organizing against the plantation owners who often broke against promises they'd given to workers before their arrival. Before the Second World War, Japanese migrants experienced the same hardships as a majority of racial minority groups have experienced historically through laws which prohibited land ownership and the right to vote. But in 1941, following the Pearl Harbor attack, things would get even worse for Japanese Americans. An estimated 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly interned in 10 different camps to a majority located in the western interior of America. Over 60% of the people being interned there were American citizens, and out of these 120,000 Japanese Americans, about 80,000 were second-generation immigrants and had been born in America. The conditions required in order to be forced into these camps were solely based upon ancestry and did not have anything to do with previous activities which could be viewed as being a threat to America. A lot of the people being imprisoned got their livelihoods taken from them as their farms withered away or were vandalized in their absence, but despite this treatment they still remained loyal to America. And that is one of the many things about all of this that fascinates me. These were people who got thrown into prison camps due to their ancestry and suspicion and distrust, yet they still, after being released, continued to live in America and they viewed themselves as being Americans. They remained loyal to America despite knowing that the Japanese were fighting to the death against Americans. They even remained loyal after finding out about this.
It will take the bomb 43 seconds to reach Hiroshima. The Enola Gay strains to escape the fury she has unleashed. At 0 minus 15 seconds, a warning tone sounds in the plane. In 10 seconds, the world will shake.
Several years after the internment had ended, an apology was issued to all Japanese Americans by former President George Bush, together with a promise that such an act should never be carried out against Americans ever again, which is more than a lot of other countries have done for far worse crimes. But I still wouldn't have blamed Japanese Americans for at the time either moving or completely isolating themselves within closed communities and effectively shutting themselves off from the rest of American society. But instead, they flourished. Japanese Americans are today in a majority of areas outdoing white Americans, and the Ivy League schools are lodged full of them. So what is the cause of this? Why did the Japanese Americans do so well when being compared to certain, who for the sake of this video not being taken down shall not be named, immigrant groups in Sweden that are stuck in a perpetual societal exclusion full of crime and unemployment? In Sweden, we have certain groups who do extremely poorly. They have poor education, high levels of criminal behavior, high incarceration rates, high amounts of poverty and welfare dependency. The list goes on. And these are people that were never anywhere nearly as poorly treated as the first Japanese migrants were. These are groups that are in Sweden given an education, a place to live, money in order to pay their bills, yet they still fail miserably. Some excuse the behavior by claiming that in the US, through the Immigration Act of 1924, effectively choked immigration from Asia so thoroughly that only the best of the best were being allowed to enter. But there is very little evidence of this, since Asians in America more or less collectively only worked menial jobs initially, and extremely few filled any positions within more prestigious lines of work. It's true that Japanese merchants, teachers, and students were being favored,
but they were such a small group that they nowhere near explain the group's overall success. So to summarize, the Japanese migrants were never given a dime upon arriving in America. They in some states were subject to laws prohibiting them from owning land and voting, and were later, despite the majority being American citizens, put in camps due to suspicion solely based upon their ancestry and not their acts. And despite all of that, the Japanese Americans still remained loyal to America and prospered. The US never experienced any terror attacks from radical Japanese Americans in support of the Japanese war effort. They never had any mass shootings or bombings as revenge for the annihilation of Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Nothing. While in Sweden, we've had riots in certain areas carried out by immigrants for complete banalities like the police doing their job and arresting a wanted felon. Why is that? How come one group is hardworking and loyal, while certain groups we have in Sweden from equally distant parts of the world are entitled, antisocial, and hateful? There exist groups in Sweden that are stuck in a perpetual loop of unemployment, crime, and welfare dependency who don't view themselves as Swedes and have no aspirations to ever do so either. Despite being given so much more than the Japanese immigrants were ever given in America, they firmly refuse to assimilate, learn Swedish, and contribute. The woke Swedish mainstream press blames it on too steep requirements in order to get into the Swedish job market, but nothing prevents these groups from going to classes to learn Swedish and then get an education in order to become more attractive on the job market. All that is required from them is to get up Monday morning, go to their class, and pay attention. I've worked together with immigrants in Sweden who learned to speak understandable Swedish in about a year, maybe 2 years, and they're also employed. It's low-paying jobs, but they have a job. Because they tried, they put in an effort. Again, there exist opportunities which never existed for the Japanese immigrants in the US. They had to work their asses off in order to put their kids through school and give them a better life than they had. So does generosity give birth to resentment and entitlement? Should we put immigrants in camps and let those who don't hate us afterwards be the only ones that are allowed to stay? Seriously though, in the end, is it all about culture? We know that strong work ethics is culturally enforced. Certain cultures have historically shunned manual labor, while others didn't mind it. And to no one's surprise, those groups soon owned the majority of businesses in the countries they immigrated to. In large parts of Latin America, for instance, there for centuries could be found a disdain among the elite against working within commerce and industry, so that naturally these areas came to be dominated by immigrant groups. In Brazil, the vast majority of the industrial entrepreneurs are either immigrants or descendants of immigrants. Is culture such an important key component in the selection of which migrants to allow into your nation? Because when people from all over the world come into your country, receive the same benefits and support, yet vary so drastically in the lives they create for themselves, the only variable left to take into account is culture. And the BS about socioeconomic factors is not an argument. It's been tried so many times, but Sweden was a poor country until rather recently, seen from a historic perspective, and we had nowhere near the levels of crime that we are witnessing today being committed by certain immigrant groups. So that's not an excuse that holds water. In the US, the descendants of Japanese immigrants are attending some of the finest schools in the country, which then also of course means the world. While in Sweden, the descendants of some immigrant groups can't even get the grades needed to move on to upper secondary school. How much of our attention should we lay on people's culture when we're forming our immigration policies? Should we do it at all? Would it be just discriminatory against the individual who perhaps doesn't suffer from these negative cultural traits? Or is it only a realistic and sound approach based upon empirical evidence? So please give me a line in the comments. I would really like to hear your thoughts about this. I think this stuff is interesting. And if you did, please like and subscribe. And until next time, take care of yourself. Bye.
I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains. I'm gonna bash them right the fuck in.